Wow, big audience here today. I think it must be the week or two just before Christmas.
I think you're right.
Yeah, I'm so glad that I've got you on the couch here today, because I think when it comes to this topic here, which is all around how do we manage in the learning environment Gen Ys and Gen Zs, we'll talk a lot more about that. But here's what was quite interesting. I put the promo together for us to be able to sit on this learning couch here, and I was typing in Karen Schmidt. And just towards the end of your name, where I put in SCHMID, T I went to put in, but Y went in there, because the T and the Y with my fat fingers are right next to each other. So I've let that go out to the net, and all I've seen up there was our next guest is Karen Schmidt. So that's who we got. We got Karen Schmidt. And why I think this topic really got me was around, is there really a difference between Gen Ys and Gen Zs in the learning environment?
Yeah, and it's a really good question to start with, Gerald, because I know when I work with people of different generations in doing leadership development, that it's one of the first questions that senior leaders will ask. They'll be saying, is there really any difference? Aren't they just like us? And when they grow up, that they're going to end up being the same as we were. And the reality is they won't. And here's why. Each generation is a result of the circumstances that were around when they were growing up. And a little acronym I like to use to help people understand those differences is STEP. So it's the social, technological, economic and political circumstances. And so if you think about the conditions that each generation's been through when it was growing up, and therefore when it was getting its early education, each of those was quite different. And you're a product of those circumstances. So then when you get to the workplace and you're looking at, well, how can we help you learn, that they've got different expectations. And I can maybe give you a way to apply that, particularly to the technological aspect. So I want you to think for a moment, Gerald, when you were a teenager, how did you listen to music? What device did you use?
I think it was a tape deck.
A tape deck? Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it was a tape deck, yeah.
Yeah. Can anyone in the audience relate to that? Who else listened to music using a tapes? Yeah. Who remembers trying to record songs off the radio? Yeah. Without getting the DJ's voice in there. Yeah. Okay, so now I want you to think about, how did your parents or grandparents listen to music?
Yeah, that one a bit tough. That might have been with the turntable, the
record.
Yeah,
the vinyls,
yeah.
Maybe even what we used to call the first wireless. Okay, so wireless nowadays is the stuff we use for our mobile devices, but in fact back in the day it was a massive piece of furniture in a house that a radio played in. Fast forward to what teenagers today, how they listen to music. So what's their device of choice?
Obviously what I'm probably using here, an iPad, an iPhone, their little device.
Now, the reason that I bring up these differences is to say that if you examine them further, you can see that it was all about customisation, portability, affordability, and these are factors that have then influenced how people look at the world. So if you've got an older generation who go, well, things come in one size and you have to buy the whole record to get all the songs, even if you don't want them, even if you only wanted to buy one, and it's quite expensive. Whereas now I can hear a song on the radio today, which is what younger generations are used to. I can hear a song in my car, I can go Shazam on it, get the name of it, press a couple of buttons, and I've downloaded it for $1.69, maybe even for free, depending on what mechanism I use. You know, can you relate to this? Maybe some of you have teenagers who are doing the same thing. So what we find then is that if you've got these expectations of customisation and affordability and portability and flexibility in the way you listen to music because of how you grew up, then when you start getting into a learning environment, you tend to bring those same expectations with you, which older generations don't have as a default mechanism. Now, many of us, and I'm one of them, I'm clearly not a Gen Y, I love technology. I love my iPhone with all of my songs on it, but I've adapted to that. That's not my natural environment. So I can actually move between different learning environments because of it. And I think that's, why we find that the different generations, and as they get younger and the technology changes, the way they learn and learn best is also changing.
But I think it would be fair to say also that my parents and myself, when we were in the training environment, that we weren't distracted with the devices that are in front of us. So we couldn't bring in the turntable, I couldn't bring in my tape deck or the boom box. It would just be uncool if I did that. But nowadays, because like you said, it's so portable that we have got the Gen Ys and Zs who are bringing in their devices, and some of us in my generation would be seeing that as a height of rudeness. What would you say to that?
Yeah, look, I hear this one all the time, and I think it's a case of you have to manage expectations around that. If you don't say anything about, look, how are we going to work with devices in this session, then they will go off and make their own decisions about it. If you talk about, look, let's put them on silent, this is how we're going to handle if a call comes in, then you're at least giving some control over that. But I also think the bigger picture is, instead of saying this is an intrusion, work with it. I mean, I'm somebody who in a session, when I'm listening and someone mentions a great quote or a book or something, I'll Google it. And I've actually had participants who have been able to fill in the blank on something we've been discussing because they were quick enough to just get on their device and actually look something up. They were still engaged, right? They weren't being distracted by Facebooking or doing something random. They were still on topic, but their minds worked differently, and they needed to know now, and they used that actually to help us rather than to hinder us.
So what you're saying is that we have to adapt to them. They don't have to adapt to us.
Oh, I would say it's meet in the middle. I think there still need to be basic etiquette in any session, whether it be around the use of device, the use of certain language, how we treat each other.
Yeah, but Karen, I get that all the time. I get people say, just grow up, just get with the times, man. You know, you're in now the 2015s.
Yeah.
What are you, still a fossil? Like, come on, this is what they're doing. So what you're saying is that now I have to adapt all of my learnings from what I've known in the past to be able to just say, right, we've got a Gen Y in here now, we've got a Gen Z in here. For me to help them learn better, I have to adapt my style. Now, I get that. I'm more than happy to do that. But what role do they play?
Yeah. I actually don't look at it quite that way. I don't think that whether you've got a whole room full of them or whether you've only got a few in a mixed group, I don't think it's about changing the whole learning environment just to suit them. Because the truth is, most of us who are watching this recording work in the business world, and we have a mixture of generations. So when they hit the workplace, they're going to have to deal with people who are different than them anyway. So I think it's that idea of introducing the concept to them in a learning environment to say there are various ways to do this and present it as a way of getting out of their comfort zone. The phrase, let's go old school, can really grab their attention sometimes. Okay, let's do this without devices, let's do this without PowerPoint or whatever it might be. And that can actually be appealing to them because it's a bit of a novelty. So I like to encourage people to be what I call generational mediators, rather than what I'm hearing a little bit from you, is you're a bit of a generational gladiator. Right? So who out in the audience has met generational gladiators? My generation's right and yours is wrong. Right? I like to think of it more as a mediator. Right? So by the mediator I mean that you can see that my generation does things a certain way, but other generations do it differently. How can we help them all to understand each other and use a bit of each of the different styles to help us get the best out of the environment? And I think that if you can get the generations working together so that we're not just saying, well, we're going to do everything because here's what Y and Z want. There's a lot of stereotyping around generations too.
Let me put this to you though. What if I was to say, trying to assimilate the generations together is a near impossibility?
Oh, you make a big statement there.
That's why I put the statement.
Yeah. I've seen it work really well if everybody's open to it. And it's got to be that, there's a level of respect there. In fact, respect is one of those words that I find is so important. A few years back, I wrote a book. I've written a few books actually, and this one, Keep 'em Keen, and it was about engaging people of all ages and career stages. And I did a lot of research for that book. And one of the things that I discovered was that the one thing that every generation has in common, the one thing, is that they all want to be respected. Nobody wants to feel disrespected. The issue we've got, though, is what does respect mean for different generations? And some research that I found demonstrated that to older generations, and I'm generalising here, of course, but what we might call your builders and baby boomer generation, respect was all about do what I tell you and give my opinion more weight than yours because I'm older. Younger generations, it could be your X's, certainly your Y's, your Z's, are simply saying that I want to feel as though I'm being heard, that my opinion also matters. It doesn't mean that I know everything, but that I have an experience that I want to share. And I find that if everybody in a learning environment can respect each other's differences, just like we do with cultural differences, just like we would have respect for somebody who has a disability of some type, that we would be inclusive of them, why can't we just be inclusive of people who represent these different generational groups?
So be a little bit more open, be a little bit more diverse, be a little bit more accepting.
Yeah.
So step out for me then what you would see as the key differences between the different generations. So the Ys, the Zs, and maybe even for myself, you know, who's the baby boomer and the builder.
Yeah, look, there's lots of ways to describe these differences. What I think about with each of them is, a few key words. So the builder generation, which we sometimes call the veteran generation. Now, there's not many of them left in the workplace anymore, but they certainly have had a big influence over our workplaces. Their three words are all about the letter S. So security, structure and stability. Now when you've been through world wars and depressions and whatever, those sort of things are very important to you. You move on to the baby boomers and they were far more interested in the M's, motivation, materialism and mobility. So they wanted to get ahead in their careers. X's, now I'm a Generation X. Does anyone else here see themselves as Generation X? We get the 3 C's. We're change, choice and cynicism. Except we don't see ourselves as cynics. I recognise myself as this generation. We don't see ourselves as being cynics. We're actually more realists. We know no job's forever, just like no relationship is forever. Right? But obviously my little pattern there, I had to come up with a word that started with the letter C, so you get where I'm coming from. Now with the Gen Ys, because they've been around a little while now, the 3 words that I've come up with is all with the letter F. Why does it always get a laugh when I bring that up? Fun, friends, future. They've grown up in an environment where things were made to be fun for them. If it's boring, I don't want to do it. Now, I'm not a parent, I'll be the first to admit that, but I put it to you that the reason that we have some of these issues, that there's certain things they don't want to do, is the way the parents have raised them, which you could say of every generation. Friends is really interesting because they want to be friends with their managers, with their trainers, their facilitators, just like they're friends with their own parents, right? Whereas I doubt that you were friends with your parents. You got on well with them, I'm sure, but friends, particularly the Facebook kind, probably not. And future, they're very much focused on the future. Now, when it comes to Gen Zs, which are only just starting to enter the workforce, okay, so obviously this sort of research, it takes a little while for us to really get our heads around it. But I think there's a lot of stuff there around the letter R, and they're talking a lot about things need to be relevant, be realistic, stuff around reinvention. But look, don't quote me on that being the exact words yet. I'm still looking out as to what I'm learning because, really, if you look at the age markers, we've only got a few of the Zs in the workforce. But what we look at is saying that as each generation comes along, those social, technological, economic and political categories are influencing them. And what we're finding is that most of that technological stuff has already happened. I mean, we've already got all the devices. So whether Zs will actually be that much different to Ys is the debate at the moment. And I think it's too early to tell whether that is the case.
So how does a manager who may be watching this get into a situation where they're so focused on getting performance and making sure that the performance of the different generations are achieved? So there's always going to be that performance gap. So I may be talking here about engagement versus personal time. How do you manage that with all the devices that are happening?
Yeah, and look, engagement's an interesting thing. That there's a difference between coming to work every day and being there for a certain number of hours, in other words, doing what we call input, versus output. That idea of it's not the hours that I work, it's the results that I get. And what we're finding is the younger the generation, the more interested they are in being measured by their output than they are by their input. And I think this is where there's a tension there. You're employed to work this hours to this hours, or this workshop's meant to run from this time to this time. Well, what if in this particular case, we achieve what we need to achieve and we're an hour early? Well, isn't that how learning works sometimes, is that you can't put it on a timetable? The same with workplaces. So we're finding a lot more flexibility, which Interestingly, older generations like too.
Yeah.
So we're getting away from that really industrial age model of the boss has to be watching you or you're not working. There's a lot of younger people who actually are very productive, but they just don't want to follow those rules that say you must have, must be sitting in that seat for this many hours a day, even if you're not doing anything.
So that's the point, I think, where it floors me, is that, you don't have to be sitting in that seat from the 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock, those hours.
Mm-hmm.
But I've got a very strong work ethic. So if I have a strong work ethic and I want the guys to start at 8 o'clock and the door's open and the customer walks in, and the doors are open at 8 o'clock and the customer needs to be served, how do I then manage, friends, fun and future? How do I manage the difference between that? And I want to be that guy who is that manager who then says, have your fun, have your friends, have the future, but hey, you need to be here on time as well.
Sure.
How do you manage that?
The first thing I would say is that is relevant for workplaces where you do literally have a door opening and a customer walking in at 8 a.m.
Yeah.
I put it to you that we're getting fewer workplaces that actually operate that way. It's not an 8 till 4 or 9 till 5 situation. Look at online services. Look at people's expectation around time. Younger people are more willing in some cases to do flexible hours if there's flexibility on both sides. So I think you've got to make sure that your metrics of what is considered good work ethic, which is turning up at the time I say you should turn up, is actually relevant to the work you're doing. If the door opens at 8 a.m. and you need to be there for that person to walk in, absolutely. But if you've just put that metric on because that's what you've always done, then you're going to be really hard to get their buy-in on it and say, well, what's the reason behind this? Why is the favourite question of younger generations? Give me a good reason why we need that, and then you may well convince me. But if it's just because we've always done it that way, because I say so, because that's just tradition, then you are going to get yourself in trouble.
But riddle me this. Riddle me this. You've got those generations who love to Facebook and Twitter and FaceTime, and they're loving sending messages, but yet when I send them a message through my device, they won't respond from their device to my device.
What do they do instead, Gerald?
Well, I don't know what they do. They're certainly not answering me. So I want to know, why is it so easy then? Is it because, no, he doesn't know how to use that device? Yet I'm asking them the question, I'm emailing them, and they won't email back. But yet they will email their friends, future and fun compatriots.
Yeah, I'm sensing a little bit of cynicism here on your part.
No, I'm serious. It's serious. I mean, these are the issues that I think people want to know, is because it's okay to have the generations who are, who we're adapting to, and I'm more than happy to adapt it. I'm using this as an example to ask you questions when I need to ask you the question just by simply looking down. So I'm very much that person who wants to be up there with technology. But then how do I manage a person who doesn't want to be managed by those devices?
Yeah. Okay, I think your real issue here is not actually devices. It's not email, it's expectations. Whether it was nowadays via email, in the past via a written memo, whatever it might be, I think it's about setting clear expectations. And this is where I'm actually a believer that we shouldn't be creating situations where we're trying to, and in the recruitment terms we call it the woo factor. Woo people into work for us. Oh, look at how bright and shiny we are. Look at how, up to date we are to get them in the door, and then later change your expectations around how the organisation actually works. I think if you can hire the right people in the first place, there are people of every age group who will respond to emails, and some who won't. And I think it's also then about in using face-to-face communication as well, because one of the things that we do know about younger generations is that there can be a disconnect. And if it's all about, I've got friends on Facebook, but do I have any in the real world? I think that it's very easy for them to hide behind devices. And I think the leaders that they appreciate the most are the ones who will actually have face-to-face conversations with them, who will connect with them, and that creates that engagement. This is where you can use that friends aspect to your advantage. And maybe it's more about being friendly than it is about being their friend, but it is about connecting with them, getting some mutual respect going, and then when you do send that email, and as long as you've worded it in a way that's effective and given them expectations and given them consequences, You know, and now the truth is that sometimes they enter the workplace, younger generations, having led lives where they have very few consequences. And I come back to the issue of how are people parenting their own children, you know, and are they setting them up to believe that they are the brightest person in the room, when the truth is that not every child wins a prize.
Yeah.
They aren't always the smartest. They sometimes will fail, and teaching them failure early on is actually a really good thing.
Oh, that's a whole nother day.
Oh, we need another session, a whole other session for that.
I think Karen called me a cynic before. We're going to take a very short break, and when we come back, I'm going to be asking Karen what are some of the biggest mistakes that organisations make when it comes to managing Gen Ys and Gen Zs that they see actually as an epic fail. I'm here with Karen Schmidt from Let's Grow. Just before the break, I asked about some of the massive or epic fails. That's a great term, isn't it? The epic fail that organisations make. Can you highlight some of those for me?
Sure, and I probably want to put a bit of a learning spin on it in this case, since that's, you know, one of our themes tonight, is I think, and I do love the term epic fail because it is something that the younger generations use. I think it's that whole one-size-fits-all. You know, that the idea that everybody learns the same way, that this is the way we've always run these programs, so therefore we're going to, you know, what worked we're going to continue doing. But times have changed. And for me, one of the things is the length of programs. You know, I've still got the occasional client who'll say, oh yes, can you come in and run 5 days in a row?
A 5-day residential, remember those?
Oh, I know, I know.
They were the days.
They were the days. You know, what we know about good learning methodology, what we also know about the pace of life now, for people of any generation, but particularly younger generations, is that that doesn't work. The epic fail is often when it's learning in big chunks rather than bite-sized. And that's what we're finding is the organisations that can actually do what we might call just-in-time learning. You know, so the bits when they need it rather than all at once. A couple of other things is also the use of technology in the wrong ways. Okay, now we always think, oh, you know, younger generations, they all want technology. But if you just take an existing program and put it online, it doesn't necessarily work. You know, you've actually got to add some things to it rather than just dump a lot of data into a PDF or something. It's not really going to be saying that you've used technology for your program. Just not going to cut it. But probably the final thing that I get organisations to keep in mind is that they make the mistake of thinking that because people are young in years, that they're lacking in experience. And yet, I don't know about you, but I've met a lot of people in their sort of late teens, early 20s, who've got some massive life experience. The things that they've done, the amount of travelling, for example, they've done by that age compared to what you or I had done by that age, means they've been exposed to a whole lot more, and they've been exposed to more too from the media. You know, if you think back to, you know, events that happened 20, 30 years ago, world events, you only read about it in a newspaper days later. You can actually watch events unfolding as they happen. And I think that's got to have an impact on the mindset, the experience level of younger people. And I think it's that whole piece of saying, well, you're only, insert an age, what would you know? And for those of us who come from a learning and development background or a HR background as I do, you know, it's that old adage of, do you have 10 years experience, Gerald? Or do you have 1 year's experience repeated 10 times? And I think they've packed a whole lot more into their years.
Because I think even with myself, you know, what this set here, built this set and putting the studio together, this was all done from the University of Google.
Yeah.
And the University of YouTube.
Yeah.
And I think the days of e-learning, I don't know if you remember those days, they were the cutting edge of 10, 15 years ago where we went, wow, e-learning, this is the new way of learning. So I want you to maybe tell us, what does it look like when an organisation gets it right?
Yeah, what does it look like when they really get it right? Now, from a learning perspective, the latest thinking, and I am not going to claim to be an expert on implementing this, but the latest thinking is gamification. Now, one example that we're hearing coming out of the US is the US Army. Now, they're having, for a while, great difficulty in getting people to sign up. But what they found was to get over that initial hurdle of at least getting them interested enough to sit down face to face with someone from the military and talk about their options, is that they've actually invented a system whereby they can play a war game online. And depending on what you score and so on, you then, you know, get to different levels and achievements. And that's getting them in to say, you know what, maybe there is something to this, and maybe there are different aspects of the military that I could get involved in. So certainly gamification is an area that we're finding is working really well. And the other is team-based learning. We know with younger generations that the way they've been educated at school is a lot more collaborative. Just a question for our audience. Who was ever accused of cheating when they were at school? Yeah? You probably just had a different learning style, that you like to collaborate. Yeah? And what we're finding is that that's got them, yeah, they went to, it's got them going now. But what we find is that the way that classrooms for you know, primary school, high school and even university are now organised is that people collaborate and they do group projects. And that therefore it's about teamwork and people working together, and isn't about that I'm cheating from you, we're learning from each other. And I think that...
Nice spin.
Well, it's not just spin, you know, this idea that observational learning, reflective learning, we recognise that these things exist. And I think it's coming up with those team projects that aren't just theoretical, but that they're real life. And this is where some organisations are enhanced by what we call corporate social responsibility. That idea that my IT crew, who might be quite young, are going to go out and work in a community organisation, helping them with something IT related, but also learning a lot about life at the same time. And if you can then do the right debrief when they come back to the organisation and say, well, what did you get from that experience? Oh, wow, this is how a different organisation than ours operates. Here's some informal learning that I did that wasn't the purpose, but that it's opened my eyes to the fact that there are other ways of doing things and other things going on in the world. They want that holistic experience. And I think the organisations that can give them that, rather than a really hierarchical learning, are finding that they're getting great results.
And do you think maybe some of the Gen Ys and Zs, they want to feel more included in the future of the strategic direction of the organisation?
Absolutely.
And that's what makes them a winning organisation.
Absolutely. And this is why I come back to what we said before about they wanting to know the answer to that question, why? And I put it to you that Generation X, as I said, that I identify with, we were the first ones starting to question and say, well, I'm not going to just do things because you tell me to. Give me a little background here. Give me a little reason why. Now, the next generations after us, the Ys and the Zs, I mean, the joke is that, of course, Gen Y stands for the letter Y or the word Y. Right? And the funny part for me is of how we even got into this whole alphabet soup of generations, if you've done your research, is that baby boomers were given a name pretty early on, you know, the baby boom after the war. A next generation came along, and a guy called Douglas Copeland in the US went, look, I know they're different, can't quite put my finger on what it is about them that's different just yet, so let's just use X as the marker. You know, as we often do in algebra or something, X, the unknown factor. They called us Generation X and it stuck. And now we've just gone through the alphabet. I'm a bit worried about Generation A. First letter of the alphabet, they're going to think they're pretty important.
Right.
You know? So, you know, there's this idea that, you know, these different generations can learn from each other.
So then what happens after Z?
Well, I'm not sure. I think it's a lot of the marketers are now coming up with these names, and if you do the research you'll find that in fact Gen Ys are not just called that, they are also called millennials, echo boomers, etc., etc. The same with Zs, they have numerous names, and alphas are the same. People are going away from that alphabet stuff, but it's still sticking to a degree.
So yourself, would you consider yourself to be, well, you're a Gen X.
Yes.
Do you feel like that you're in the right generation, or do you feel like that you're more in tune with being a Y or a Z?
Oh, okay. Look, I get asked this one a lot when people, often when I run workshops, I'll give like a little quiz that we do to figure out what generation you are, ask them some questions, and I get a lot of people in their 50s and 60s who go, I think I'm Gen Y. And just because you know who Taylor Swift is doesn't mean that you're Gen Y. All right? Yeah, exactly. It means you're having a midlife crisis. Look, to me, which generational group you belong to, particularly if you were born around the cusp between two generations, it's more than about your own personal experience. And I think we need to not get caught up on, oh, well, I was born this year and you were born, you know, 3 months later, and therefore we're two different generations. I identify with Generation X. I have a lot of friends who are Gen Ys and even some who are Gen Zs. Now, I'm not being a parent, I perhaps have a different perspective too, because I don't look at them in a parenting way. I just see that my younger friends are friends of mine because we have something in common, a shared interest, a shared passion, and they actually, and they're really good at it, they look past age. You know, give you an example, some of my Gen Y, Gen Z friends are ballroom dancers. That's a hobby of mine. We have that in common. One of my favourite dance partners is 20 years old. Now, some people find that weird that I would dance with a 20-year-old and that they would want to dance with me when I'm potentially old enough to be their mother. But they don't see my age. They see Karen the dancer. And I think that that's the thing that older generations could learn from, is to say, it's not about categorising people based on their age. It's about taking you as an individual and what are those shared experiences that we have. And I think that younger generations, on the whole, are much better at doing that than older generations, who immediately look at this and go, that's inappropriate. I went, we're friends. Yeah. I take dancing advice from him. I don't take dating advice from him.
It's interesting you say that. I was just looking, somebody had tweeted in, I can't even believe I said the word tweeted, but somebody had tweeted in, I think I'm a Generation Y person in a baby boomer's body. So is it really defined, which I think you highlighted, is it really defined by age or by characteristics?
Look, it is by characteristics, but I think you've got to be realistic and say that if you know a baby boomer thinking they're a Gen Y is more about, I relate well to my own children. Yes, I like technology, but there are some other value systems that are probably quite different. I personally, I think you can probably move a generation either side of where you are. I know some baby boomers who are actually far more like builders, and they'll admit. They're very conservative, very old-fashioned in the way they do things, and they look at the way they were raised and the environment they were raised in, and they can understand why.
People would say they have an old soul, wouldn't they?
They
They
could,
would say,
yeah.
You're an old soul, you've been here before.
Yeah, it can be a bit like that.
So here's what I want to know.
Yep.
I want you to help me. I'm going to go back into the workplace tomorrow, and I want you to help me, give me the number one tip that I can go back into the workplace to relate better with the Generation X's, Y's and Z's.
One tip.
Just give me one for now.
One tip would be getting to know them, building rapport, seeing them as individuals. So looking past the age, looking past all the stereotypes, and there are plenty of them out there.
Yeah.
You know, when we talk about generational descriptors, they're probably true for about 85% of people born in a particular time frame, and they're mainly true for people in what we might call westernised cultures. So if you have an overlay of that you come from a very different culture than that, say, here in Australia, that can have an impact. I've done a lot of work in Malaysia, for example, and we find there that their age groupings are slightly different, although their Gen Ys are catching up. They sort of went baby boomer, Gen Y. They don't have a lot of X's. They tend to be very much like their baby boomers. So I think it's about realising that we can all get together and get on better if we can see things from other people's perspectives rather than stereotyping.
I know a lot of organisations, that the bigger organisations have dollars to spend in this area.
Yep.
But what about the SMEs? You know, the ones that 50 to 100 people, even less. Let's just go a small organisation that's got 20 people. How do they, I guess, collaborate more with the younger generation?
Sure. I think with smaller business, that it's a matter of creating that sense of community. You know, younger generations do want to feel like part of a community. They often want work with a purpose, and if they can feel that their organisation has that purpose, which small business can do so much better at times than big business can do. I think it's also about groups of small businesses coming together, because one of the issues you can have with very ambitious younger people, and I've heard this before, they have high expectations. I think the line that we sometimes hear is, they want to be CEO in 6 months.
Yeah.
Is that if you work in a smaller organisation, it can be hard to both attract and retain them. But if you can show that you have links to others in your field, and I've saw a really good example of the physiotherapy industry where I've done some work. Usually smaller practices, but what they've done is a practice here in Brisbane had collaborated with a practice in Cairns, and they did swaps. So somebody from Cairns could come to Brisbane for a while, perhaps learn some different skills, see a different environment, do it the other way around, a bit of an adventure, figure out whether do I like the city, do I like the regional areas, two small businesses, but they thought outside the square, and they actually were able to make themselves appear larger than they actually are. And I think that's the advantage that smaller business has. I suppose the word of warning for small business owners would be they need to avoid trying to have a parent-child relationship with younger employees. You know, that if you're going to go parental on them and be worried about them and you know, and perhaps give in to some of their demands, then they'll do it. My favourite example, a story that happened in a workshop I was running, and I'll admit most of the people in there were baby boomers and X's, and we were talking about, you know, how to better lead younger generations. And one of the mothers in the group, whose child was 24, I think, finished university, moved out of home, got their own flat, had a good job now, realised that she was still paying for their mobile phone service. It had been signed up when they were at uni, you know, was required at the time, had never done anything about it. Mum didn't want to seem mean by having the conversation. We chatted about this in the morning, and I said, you know, look, you need to set some boundaries. You need to let them stand on their own 2 feet, or you're actually not helping them. She said, right, I'm going to do something about this. In the lunch break, she calls the 24-year-old and says, look, I think it's about time you started paying for your own mobile phone. And their response was, I was wondering when you were going to get round to this. So they were not shocked by it.
Yeah.
But if you're going to let them get away with it,
Yeah.
they're going to get away with it.
Yeah.
And equally, it might be that they feel, look, this makes mum or dad or whoever it is feel better, so I'll go along with that. So if you don't give them any responsibility and ask them to act like adults, they will just, I think that the term is kidults, halfway between a kid and an adult, or adolescence, halfway between an adult and an adolescent. You know, they will continue to live their lives like that because you're enabling it. And yet when you stand up to them, not in a mean way, but simply to say, I think it's time, they went, okay, I'll fix it tomorrow. And they did.
So the way I see organisations, I see an organisation like Google and Apple and Facebook. They're on the cutting edge of utilising the, like you say, the younger generation, not in age but in experience. But they're very much American companies.
Yep.
Have you got a really good example of an Australian company that is using the same principles that our friends over in the States are using, that works well here?
Sure. Technology industries are, of course, the easy ones to go with. And I'm not saying that there aren't other examples out there, but there's actually a homegrown example of a highly successful technology company. In fact, I think it has the 2 top performing apps at the moment. You might have heard of one of them that's called Fruit Ninja. Anyone here ever played Fruit Ninja? Yeah? It comes from an organisation called Halfbrick, who are based here in Brisbane, Queensland. And I've actually seen their offices. I haven't had a tour, but I have had a bit of a sneak peek. And they've created an environment where young programmers want to work. And their success would not have come about if they didn't have access to those young minds and find ways to engage them. That's how they've won those awards. Now, they're not a huge organisation, but and yes, I know they're technology based, but I think they're the sort of case studies that you could look at and say, how have they used flexibility? How have they said that it's not about coming to work at these hours dressed in this way, meeting these old-fashioned rules? It's about saying, let's work with who people are, and not just the young ones, but we find people of all generations are actually looking for workplace flexibility.
See, I guess from what you just said, I mentioned a couple of those organisations, Google, Microsoft,
Apple,
all those, and the ones from Halfbrick. They're all technology-based organisations, and they do attract, I think, the younger, savvy, techno-based people who are attracted to that organisation. But what about, I'm thinking professional services. I'm thinking maybe of an organisation that has, a small bunch of, accountants or law people. They are the sort of people who are struggling with, how do I get that person off the device and get engaged in making the business work for us?
Yeah.
So it's good when we say it works in technology, but we're not all just techno savvy people.
I agree. Now, look, I have done some work in the professional services area in the past, and it's really interesting some of the conversations that I've had. I think the problem is a lot of them talk about being leading edge, but they don't actually know the definition of it.
Yeah, that's
and I'll give you an example. I won't name the firm, obviously, but I got into a conversation after a conference presentation with someone. I was talking about, workplace flexibility and how this is an important part of leadership skills, but also attracting younger generations. And this very excited accountant, can you imagine an excited accountant,
Yeah.
coming up to me and said, "Oh, Karen, we've got a great story. We're leading edge in this. We've got this fabulous workplace flexibility program." I went, "Great, tell me about it. I'm always looking for, as you said, those real life examples." And he goes on to tell me all about his program. He said, "Yeah, we have flexible working hours. Everybody has Friday afternoon off." Now, he didn't get that was not flexibility. Equally, some of these big firms, and I'm well quoted as saying this to their face, is that they have this very structured up or out system, that you must be progressing at this particular level by this stage and going into leadership whether you like it or not, because we've determined that is the career ladder that you are to go on, because that's the way we've always done it. Another conversation I had with another one, and this isn't to disparage professional services, but that was the area that we sort of, you picked up on, was another conversation where they said, "Oh, we can't get women to become partners in our firm. Can you please help us to understand, particularly younger women, how to get them involved?" And so we chatted about the criteria and how it all works. And I said, "Well, have you ever considered having a part-time partner?" A lot of women, child-rearing years, etc. "Oh, no, you can't be a part-time partner." Because it turns out to be a partner, you not only have to have that financial responsibility and that leadership responsibility, you have to carry almost a full caseload of actual work that the people below you are doing. And I went, well, there's exactly why young people aren't putting their hand up. Because work-life balance, well, they don't even think about it as work-life balance now. They just think about it as having a life.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is really important to them. And I actually think that that's a step forward from the baby boomers who gave us the term workaholic. Who work themselves into the ground and don't necessarily now find that worked for them.
I have a tough one for you. I want to wrap up with this. What does the future hold for us, especially in the learning space? We've gone so far from me using a slate to now using the iPad.
Yeah.
What do you think the future's got for us?
Okay. As somebody who works in this area, I am highly confident that there will always be a place for good facilitators. That face-to-face, personalised learning, whether it be one-to-one, one to a group, if you are somebody who can engage with people and create an environment whereby that you're grabbing their attention, you're getting them to think differently, that will work. I think what's going to disappear, though, is highly regulated, accredited programs that don't actually meet the needs of people who are doing them, and programs that are too long and inflexible. We talk about flipped classroom, we talk about the use of technology. I like to think that our role is to create lifelong learners, people who love learning, who will do it on their own, who will use the YouTubes and the TEDs and the whatever else to augment what we're doing with them. So they come to our events when they're live or when they're virtual, excited about the prospect of learning. And I think that's what we can pass on, is a love of learning, and then customising that to what different people want, rather than feeling like we have to have these systems that get you a piece of paper at the end. But if you don't create a love of learning in people, then what's the point? They're not going to go and do it by themselves. And to me, if people are going away doing their own learning after I've done something with them, then I know that I've been successful in my role.
I've got one more for you. It's just come in.
Okay.
It sounds like that these people are just used to being sport little brats and need a dose of battling for a change.
Oh, yes. I don't know that it's about being spoilt brats, and I don't know if it's about battling, but I will agree with the person who wrote that question that we need to give them realistic expectations around what to expect when we get to the workplace and the real world. And I think that is in the responsibility of not only their parents, but other adults in their lives who are giving them realistic impressions about their own skill set. I mean, look at the experience in some of those reality TV shows where they're horrified that they didn't make it into the next round, of Australian Idol or whatever it is, because someone's told them they can sing when clearly they can't. I think we've got to have a bit of tough love.
Right.
And I think that, being realistic with people is, they appreciate it, rather than the whitewash. So if there are spoilt brats out there who think they're entitled, I think the people who are feeling that way maybe need to look in the mirror and think, what part did they play in creating that?
I think a lot of those spoilt brats that we were just talking about have just bombarded the Twitter sphere here. So I'm just waiting now for the responses that come from this. Karen, I have really enjoyed this session here because I think it just opens up my mind as to, you know, trying to adapt and assimilate and, of course, collaborate with, you know, and whether we want to call them Gen Ys, Gen Xs or whatever, I think they're just people who have got different mindsets, have got different experiences, they've got different characteristics. So I want to thank you so much. Could you put your hands together for Karen for being here from Let's Grow. And if you want to be on the Point TV or on the Learning Couch, the links are on the screen. Come and join us or be a part of our studio audience. Thanks very much for watching.